Hi, I'm Aelith, and I wasn't dying. But I begged, please, I can't breathe. And my mother, she didn't ask where I was or if I was okay. She asked if I was dying, then she hung up the phone. Turns out, my sister's breakup was more urgent than my body bleeding on an ER table. They left me there, alone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they'd been doing that my whole life. Silently, cleanly, legally. So how does a family get away with erasing their own daughter while still expecting her to pay the bills? Would you have opened the door if it were your sister crying in the rain? Would you have answered if it were your father's heart failing? Because I didn't. And this is why. I don't remember the sound of the collision. Not exactly. Not the screech of tires, not the glass exploding. What I remember is the absence that followed, that deep, hollow silence when all the noise had already done its damage and you're still trying to decide if you're alive. Then came the sting, sharp and raw across my leg, and something wet in my mouth. Blood, maybe, or fear. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling I didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights, harsh and humming. I couldn't lift my head, couldn't make out the voices around me. One was saying something about internal bleeding. Another called out a code I didn't understand. I wanted to ask where I was, but my mouth didn't obey. My chest heaved like I was drowning in open air. They wheeled me down endless corridors, the kind that buzz with activity but feel completely alone. A nurse asked if I could hear her. I blinked, barely. She squeezed my hand. I think she was trying to comfort me. But all I felt was the pressure of bones barely holding together. Somewhere between the hallway and the examination room, they pulled my phone from my pocket. It was cracked down the center, spidering across the screen like my thoughts. I don't know why, but my fingers moved on instinct. Emergency contact. Mom. Dad. I hit call. It rang. No answer. I hit it again. Voicemail. One more try. This time, my mother picked up. What's wrong? We're in the middle of something, she said, a whisper of annoyance already in her voice. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. I pushed the words out like gravel. Please, I can't breathe. She paused, and then came the words I will never forget. Not because they were cruel, but because they were said so casually, like she was asking me to pick up milk from the store. Are you really dying, Aelith? Because Isolde just had a complete meltdown. Her boyfriend left her this morning. She's spiraling, honey. We need to keep her grounded. I couldn't speak, not even to plead. The line went silent for half a second, and then disconnected. She hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart racing in a way no monitor could catch. It didn't beep or blare. It just thudded quietly, each beat echoing louder than the last. The screen dimmed, my hand trembled, and in that moment I realized something awful. They weren't coming. A nurse walked back in. Her face was soft, kind. Is anyone on their way, sweetheart? I nodded before I even thought. A lie slipped out, not to protect them, but to protect myself from the shame of admitting no one cared enough to be here. She smiled. Okay, I'll check back soon. You just rest, all right? I watched her leave. I kept staring at the doorway long after she disappeared, waiting for the shadow of someone familiar to fill it. A dad's worried voice. A mom's nervous energy. A sister, maybe. I would have taken anyone who knew my middle name. But the door stayed empty. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel angry. I felt stripped, like something had been carved out of me and tossed down the drain. Not pain. Pain I could handle. I've broken bones before. This was something else. This was being unseen, unchosen. I tried to piece together what had happened. Not the crash, but the part that hurt more. The part where my own mother heard my breath hitch and decided my sister's heartbreak was more urgent. What did it mean? That I was strong, that I'd always been strong, so they assumed I'd figure it out, even now. Or maybe it meant I was forgettable, that they'd gotten so used to me taking care of myself, they didn't remember what I sounded like when I needed them. My mind kept looping those 6 words. Are you really dying, Aelith? If I had said yes, would it have mattered? Would they have come? Would they have dropped the drama of my sister's latest soap opera to rush to the hospital where their daughter was laid out with a crushed leg and a fractured rib? I knew the answer. Deep down, I always knew. The beeping of machines beside me was the only thing that gave rhythm to the hours that followed. Night crept in through the blinds. Nurses came and went. One brought me a blanket. Another checked my IV. No one asked why I hadn't had visitors. By the time midnight rolled around, I wasn't just lying in a hospital bed. I was lying in a truth I had spent years denying. That I wasn't the daughter they chose to worry about. That no matter how dependable I had been, I would never be the emergency. The thought didn't make me cry. It didn't even make me sad. It made me still. I stared at the ceiling, at the specks and stains no one noticed. And slowly, I let myself believe what I had always known, but never dared to say out loud. I could disappear, and it would be days before anyone checked. The nurse came in one last time, adjusting my monitor. "Still no one coming?" she asked softly. I wanted to say something. Anything. But all I managed was a whisper. I think something just broke in me that'll never grow back. The monitors beside my bed kept up their steady rhythm, but I barely noticed anymore. The pain meds hadn't knocked me out the way the nurse expected. Maybe I was just used to operating on autopilot, even when everything hurt. Maybe I was tired of being unconscious in more ways than one. I stared at the ceiling, the same blank tiles I'd counted during the previous night, only now the light was softer. That strange glow hospitals cast after visiting hours end and everyone not dying tries to sleep. But I wasn't dying. And not technically, and maybe that was the problem. They only show up when someone's falling apart in a way they can see. I shifted slightly, careful not to aggravate the pain in my leg. Even that dull throb was easier to manage than the other kind. The one digging into my chest like splinters under the skin. I couldn't stop hearing her voice. "Are you really dying?" "No, Mom. I'm not dying. I'm just realizing I've been invisible to you for 3 decades. A memory crept in. Uninvited, but not unfamiliar. I was 10. We had balloons tied to the porch, streamers hanging across the garage door, and a vanilla cake with bright blue frosting that said, "Happy birthday, Alith." I remember the candles, 10 tall ones, and me waiting for the cue to blow them out. But before I could, Isolde let out a sob. She didn't fall, didn't scrape her knee, didn't get stung by a bee. She just stood there, staring at the cake, tears spilling down her face. She whispered something about how it wasn't fair that she didn't get a party too. My mother rushed to her side like she'd been shot. "It's okay, baby," she cooed. "It's just a party. We'll do something special for you next weekend." Then she turned to me, not angry, just firm. "Be understanding, sweetie. She's more sensitive. She doesn't handle things like you do." The party was over within 15 minutes. No candles blown, no gifts opened. They boxed up the cake and gave me the "just be flexible" look. I was 10. What was I going to do, throw a tantrum? That would have made me the difficult one. So I smiled. I always smiled. Even when my name got taken off the invitations. Even when my birthday turned into an afterthought. I blinked back to the present, still staring at that ceiling, still waiting for someone to call and ask if I needed anything. No one did. I reached for my phone, careful not to disturb the IV taped to the back of my hand. It lit up immediately. No missed calls, no new messages. I unlocked it and opened my bank app out of habit, mostly because I needed to feel like I was in control of something. Scrolling through the last few months of transfers felt like self-harm. $600 to Mom. Emergency repairs. $450 to Isolde. Therapy copay. $100 to Dad's checking. Tax mistake. He swears he'll return it. Line after line after line of quiet giving. Not once had I been paid back. Not once had I been acknowledged. It was like I'd been a ghost with a debit card. I opened my email. Searched for reimburse. Nothing came up. Then, just to see what I already knew, I searched thank you. One message. From a coworker last year after I covered her presentation. From my family? Not a word. I closed my eyes and let the nausea settle. They'd built their comfort on my silence. My predictability, my inability to say no. And every time I felt that sting of being overlooked, I'd remind myself, it's because they think I'm strong. But strength shouldn't mean disposable. Another memory hit. This one from college. I'd won a statewide academic competition. My name was printed in the local paper. The award ceremony was an hour away, and I asked my parents to come. Isolde had a panic attack that morning because of a B- on her psych midterm. They didn't come. Be fair, Mom said. Your sister needed us more. No pictures of me on stage, no family dinner afterward. Just a plastic trophy and an empty inbox. And still, I let it go. I always let it go. Another notification pulled me back. Instagram. Isolde had posted photos from her new art exhibit. I knew the gallery. I paid the booking fee, quietly, anonymously, because she said she'd have a meltdown if the venue rejected her again. Underneath the photo, our mother had commented, "Proud of my girl who built this from the ground up." No tag, no mention, not even a nod. I scrolled through the comments. "You're amazing! How do you do it all? She's got such resilience." And Isolde, ever the poetic fraud, replied, "Just pushing through. It's been such a hard year, but I made it." I should have been angry, furious, ready to storm the comments section, but instead, I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling again. What good would it do? They'd just tell me I was jealous, that I was making a scene. No one ever likes the sibling who points out the favoritism, even when it's burning through the walls like wildfire. I exhaled slowly, pain blooming again near my ribs. The morphine drip beeped softly, trying to do its job. But the thing is, no medication touches this kind of ache. I wasn't dying, but I was done. Done performing strength so they could call it stability. Done pretending that being left off the thank you card was just an oversight. Done sending money so they could call it love. I looked around the room. It was quiet, dim. My reflection in the monitor screen didn't even look like me anymore. Somewhere out there, my family was pretending I was okay, just like they always had. Pretending I didn't mind, that I didn't feel the sting when they overlooked me, that I didn't notice how Isolde's breakdowns earned sympathy and mine earned silence, and they'd do it again tomorrow, and next month, and next year. Unless I changed something. Unless I disappeared. Not literally, not dramatically, just emotionally, legally, financially, completely. If they don't see me after everything I've done, I whispered, more to the ceiling than to myself, maybe I need to disappear for real. I didn't sleep after hitting send on the email to Delora. I just lay there, my body still pinned to the mattress by pain and medication, but my mind wide awake, sharper than it had been in weeks. The hospital room was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of nurses down the hallway and the low hum of machines beside my bed. At some point, the air conditioner kicked on, blowing cool air into the already chilled space. Goosebumps prickled along my arms, but I didn't reach for the blanket. I needed the discomfort to match what was twisting inside. I turned my phone screen on again, even though I knew nothing new would be there. No messages, no missed calls. But the silence gave me permission to go looking elsewhere, in places I had purposely avoided until now. I opened my email and searched for a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside it were a handful of documents Dad had sent me when I was in grad school. Financial agreements. A copy of the old will. I clicked open the PDF with the heading, Nyland Property Distribution, Initial Draft. Page 3. My name was there, clear as day. Co-heir to the house in Lake Oswego, equal shares with Isolde. I remembered him saying, just in case something ever happens, you girls will each have a piece of something solid. It felt fair, once upon a time, back when I still believed I was part of their long-term picture. Then I remembered the shared Google Drive I'd stumbled into weeks earlier while trying to help Isolde apply for another grant. There'd been a document tucked into the family archive folder. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now I reopened the drive, scrolled past the family vacation photos and scanned tax returns, and found the file, Finalized Nyland Estate 2022 PDF. My name wasn't on it, not even in the footnotes. I stared at the screen, my heart pacing. It didn't thud with surprise, more like a slow, bitter throb of confirmation. I was no longer part of their legacy, not even on paper. What made it worse was knowing the change had been made months ago. No conversation, no courtesy, just deleted, quietly, like I'd died without them noticing. I could almost hear the excuse before it was spoken. Honey, you already have your own place. You're stable. Isolde needs the security more than you. They always framed it like compassion, like choosing her wasn't really not choosing me. It was just being pragmatic, empathetic, balanced. Except that was a lie dressed in warm tones. It was preference, repackaged and justified. A buzz from my phone broke the trance. A notification from Facebook. I opened it, more out of habit than interest. There she was. My sister, smiling at her laptop, holding a coffee mug, captioned, "Pushing through even the hard days. Submitted my first full grant proposal on my own today. Grateful for the strength to keep going." And beneath it, Vera's comment. "So proud of our Isolde. She's come such a long way. Nobody fights harder." I blinked, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. That proposal, I wrote it, every line, every paragraph. I edited her typos, reworked the budget table, formatted the citations. She had texted me in a panic at 10 p.m., the night before the deadline, saying she couldn't think straight and needed me to just look it over. She'd cried, said she couldn't afford to mess it up, that she'd spiral again. And, like always, I stepped in and fixed it. And now she was posing like a self-made success, and Mom was beaming like she'd raised a warrior. My name, of course, was nowhere in the story. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the blanket with a soft thud. That was the moment it all became undeniable. This wasn't about one Facebook post or a line in a will. It was about a lifetime of being written out of the narrative, while simultaneously being written into every bill, every bailout, every behind-the-scenes cleanup. I was the ghost who held their lives together. The only time my name appeared in family threads or messages was at the end of a sentence that began with, "Can you help us out just this once?" There was always a reason: a job loss, a therapist's invoice, a flat tire, a rent hike, a crisis. And me? I never had a crisis big enough to compete. I just handled things, quietly, consistently, invisibly. I opened my contacts, scrolled, Mom, Dad, Isolde. Not one message in the last 48 hours. Not one, "Are you okay?" Not one, "We're sorry." I hovered my thumb over each name, tempted to delete them. But something in me paused. Not because I wanted to keep the connection, but because I wanted a record of its absence. Instead, I clicked into my father's contact and edited his name. From Dad to donor, not Dad. It felt petty, but also weirdly empowering. I wasn't trying to punish him. I just needed the truth labeled properly for once. Another wave of exhaustion rolled through me, not from pain, but from clarity. I wasn't the daughter they loved differently. I was the placeholder, the one who filled the gaps when the other one cracked. I reached for my phone again and opened a new email. To Delora Kane, subject, need to talk. Body, hi Delora, I hope you're well. I'm in the hospital right now, but I've come across some things I think we need to discuss. Urgently. I hovered over the send button, then tapped it without flinching. It wasn't about revenge, it was about self-respect. And for the first time in my life, I was going to make them look me in the eye, or at least into a courtroom. I stood inside my bedroom for a full minute after locking the door. My hand was still wrapped around the knob, but I didn't move. I just let the weight of it all settle in my shoulders, in my back, in that part of me that always stood up straighter than it needed to, just to keep peace. I wasn't doing that anymore. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of texts, family thread, Mom's number, a few from Isolde, even Thorne, which was rare enough to make me pause. I didn't need to open them to know what they were about. Sunday, the family brunch, they were still planning to host it here, in my apartment, as if the past 2 weeks hadn't happened. As if I hadn't been in a hospital bed begging for breath while they comforted my sister over a breakup. As if the lawsuit I'd hinted at in my email to Delora hadn't even landed in their inbox. The first message I actually opened read, "Still okay to do Sunday. Everything's in motion. Food is confirmed. Mom said we're using your kitchen like last time." Then another, "Don't forget to confirm the food delivery. They need a credit card on file." Not one. "How are you feeling?" Not even a, "Glad you're home safe." I didn't reply. I got up, pulled on a soft sweater, and sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the stack of mail I'd been ignoring. Most of it was junk, a few hospital bills I didn't have the energy to open yet. My legs still throbbed when I stood too long, but I'd been managing. It was what I did best. That Sunday came quicker than I wanted it to. By noon, the apartment was filled with the familiar hum of voices and the clinking of ceramic dishes. The catering company had arrived without a hitch, no thanks to me. Isolde must have coordinated it. People floated in and out of the living room, balancing champagne flutes and small talk. Laughter bubbled from the kitchen. I watched it all from the hallway, leaning slightly against the doorframe, bracing my body, but also my nerves. The invitation had said, "Hosted by the Nylons," which was technically true. Except it was my lease on the wall, my name on the utility bills, my Wi-Fi keeping their social media scrolling. No one seemed to notice. A couple from Mom's church came up and said, "Vera, this is such a lovely place. You've really made it your own." She smiled sweetly, resting a hand on her blouse like she'd picked the throw pillows herself. She didn't correct them. I cleared my throat, loud enough. They glanced at me, unsure. "Oh, and who are you?" the woman asked. "Are you helping with the event?" Before I could respond, Mom chimed in, still smiling. "This is Aelith. She's been a huge help. A space, a resource, a rental without rent." I nodded, turned on my heel, and walked toward the kitchen without a word. My leg protested, but my temper outpaced the pain. I needed air. Or distance. Maybe both. The evening dragged. I kept to myself, refused to refill anyone's glass, didn't pretend to laugh at the right jokes. People started to notice, but no one said anything. Not out loud, anyway. Later, after most of the guests had gone and only family lingered, I was in the kitchen checking that nothing had been left burning in the oven. My mother came in, holding her iPad. "Do you have the final catering receipt?" she asked casually, like we hadn't stood in a hospital just days before and watched her leave without looking back. I wiped my hands, took the iPad, and tapped through the tabs. That's when it happened. The message blinked into view. She must have left her iMessages open. It was a thread between her and Thorn. "Vera, let's not involve her in the title stuff. She takes things too personally. Keep it clean. She's doing fine." Thorn, "Got it. She doesn't need to know. Easier this way." My heart didn't pound. It slowed. The screen felt like fire in my hands. I locked the tablet, walked into the living room where both of them were stacking dessert plates, and held it out to her with both hands. "I saw your message," I said calmly. Vera froze mid-reach. Thorn glanced up, then quickly back down. "You're not going to erase me and call it efficiency," I added, my voice even, precise. She blinked, lips parting like she wanted to apologize, or pretend not to know what I was talking about. Instead, she said, "Aelith, this isn't the time." I smiled. "Just once. Just enough." It never is, right? Not when I was 10 and Isolde cried over my birthday. Not at graduation when you left because she had a panic attack over a B-. Not when I was bleeding in an ER and you were soothing her over a breakup. It's never the time. Thorn cleared his throat. "Let's not do this right now." But I was already done with patience. "Next time you host anything here without putting my name on it," I said clearly, "you'll be renting this place." At market rate. I left them standing there. My hands didn't shake. I didn't go far, just to my bedroom. But the act of walking away while they stood in my space felt like reclaiming something that had been slowly drained out of me over years. Once inside, I turned the lock, not for safety, not for silence, but because I was drawing a line, one they'd finally see. I stared at the screen for a long while after that notification popped up. You've been removed from the group. Just like that. No warning, no explanation. 1 second, I was part of the thread, silent but present. The next, gone. Like I never belonged in the first place. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was heavy. A door didn't just close, it slammed. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the couch cushion, leaned back, and closed my eyes. My mind wasn't spinning, not anymore. It had been slow brewing something else, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. There was nothing left to salvage. No more space for hope that they'd realize what they were doing and come running back. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, a pattern, a truth. So I made one of my own. 2 days later, I got dressed for the first time in something other than sweatpants and a hoodie. My legs still ached if I stood too long, but I moved slowly, deliberately. No more pacing like I was waiting for something to change. I had somewhere to go, and I was walking in there not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman they underestimated. Delora Kane's office was tucked in a 2-story brick building on the east side, across from a coffee shop I used to frequent before things spiraled. Her receptionist smiled when I walked in. A real one, not that tight, brittle thing people offer when they pity you. Delora met me at the door of her office, blazer sharp, presence calm. We didn't do small talk. She gestured for me to sit and said, "I got your email. Let's talk." And so I did. I laid it all out, the will I was quietly erased from, the brunch where my name was left off everything, the messages I wasn't supposed to see. Her expression never wavered. She just listened, taking notes occasionally, nodding as I explained how Isolde's grant proposal, the one they'd all been praising on social media, was something I had written, word for word. When I was finished, Delora looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: belief. She didn't question if I was being dramatic. She didn't suggest I let it go for family's sake. She just said, "This isn't just disrespect. This is a pattern of coercion and misuse, and you've documented most of it, which is good." She drafted the paperwork right there. First, the revocation of all financial authorizations and emergency access I'd granted over the years. Then a formal review of property documents tied to the family trust. Finally, a preliminary letter to Isolde and Vera outlining intent to investigate fraud if there were further misuses of my work or identity. I signed with a steady hand. When I got home that afternoon, the sky was darkening with early spring clouds. I made myself tea. Chamomile, the only thing in my cabinet that didn't have some memory attached to it. I sank into the armchair by the window, phone in hand, not expecting anything. But still, habit made me check. I didn't expect the headline in my email from the nonprofit's newsletter. Featured artist, Isolde Nyland, shares her journey to healing through art and resilience. The photo was one of her smiling in her studio, the one I helped her rent. The first quote, "Writing that grant myself gave me the confidence to try again." The grant she wrote was mine. Every sentence, every calculation, every word. And there it was, in print, published and emailed to hundreds of donors and professionals, with no mention of me. Again. But this time, it wasn't just a family slight. It was theft, public, professional, intentional. I read the article twice, then I closed the tab. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my mug across the room. Instead, I opened our shared family drive, located the folder labeled Grant Docs, Isolde, and deleted it without hesitation. Then, I blocked Isolde's number and email. Not a pause, not a pang. I forwarded the article to Delora with a single line in the subject. They took my name. Now I take it back. No one had the right to my voice anymore. Not when they only cared for it when it served them. After that, I went to the group chat, the one I'd been removed from, and opened a new thread with only 3 recipients: Vera, Thorne, and Isolde. I typed, "Plagiarism is a form of fraud. This is your one and only warning. If I see my work or identity used again without my consent, I will escalate legally." Then I hit send. No emojis, no sign-offs. No hope you're well. Within minutes, Vera removed herself from the thread. Isolde never responded. Thorne's red receipt lingered the longest before disappearing. I didn't need them to say anything. Their silence was already loud enough. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured the rest of my tea down the sink. The air outside had turned damp, and I could hear the soft tap of rain beginning against the windows. Something in me knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. They weren't used to being held accountable. But this time, I wasn't going to roll over and cushion the blow. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, they'd have to do it without my money, my words, or my silence. That was the line I finally drew. And they'd just stepped over it. The front door shut behind me with a softness that betrayed how hard my jaw was clenched. I didn't respond to Isolde's voice, that final shriek that always came when things didn't go her way. "You'll regret this," she had snapped like a spoiled child with her hand caught in the cookie jar. Maybe once upon a time I would have flinched. Not anymore. I didn't regret walking out. I regretted ever walking in. It was Vera's idea. Of course it was. "A family talk," she'd said in her email. "Nothing dramatic, just a chance to clear the air." That's how she put it, as if the air hadn't been thick with avoidance for years, as if the real drama hadn't already played out the night they chose silence over my safety. Still, I showed up, because I needed to. Not for closure, not for peace, but because if they were going to sit me down and play pretend, I was going to make sure they heard me for the first time in their lives, even if I had to blast the truth through the stained glass windows of their comfortable little lies. The house looked exactly the same: white shutters, trimmed hedges. The scent of citrus-scented furniture polish hit me the moment I stepped inside. My mother's way of disinfecting discomfort. And there they were, seated in a tidy circle in the living room like a church counseling group. Vera with her peppermint tea, Thorne with his ever-present newspaper folded neatly in his lap. Isolde, legs crossed tightly, sipping from a mug she hadn't earned. "Thanks for coming," Vera said, her voice all sugar and sharp corners. "We were hoping to have a calm, loving conversation." I didn't sit right away. I stood near the entry, scanning the arrangement like I was walking into a deposition, not a gathering of kin. "You've been distant," Vera continued, setting her mug down on the coaster. "Your tone has been strained, and we think it's time we address what's been happening." "You've changed," Isolde added. Her voice was soft, but the insult was jagged. "You used to be so helpful, so steady. Now it's like you're angry all the time." I said nothing. They didn't notice the recorder in my pocket. They didn't notice that I hadn't taken off my coat. They didn't notice because they never did. That's the whole problem. I finally moved, slowly, deliberately, and sat down in the empty chair they'd so kindly left for me, the only one without a cushion. "You gathered a room to discuss my tone," I said evenly, but never once checked if I was breathing after the accident. Thorne shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. "I was in an emergency room," I continued, "with a broken leg and cracked ribs. And I called you. Do you remember what you said, Mom?" Vera tilted her head like she always did when she was ready to deny something. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and tapped a button. The room filled with static. And then my own broken voice played through the speaker. "Please, I can't breathe." And then her reply, unmistakable. "Are you really dying? Isolde just had a complete meltdown. She's spiraling, honey. We need to keep her grounded." The audio ended. Nobody moved. Vera's hands wrapped tight around her teacup. Isolde's expression tightened into something between rage and humiliation. "Would you like me to play it again?" I asked. Vera opened her mouth, to argue, maybe to deny, but I cut her off by opening the small black notebook in my lap. I'd brought it not for theatrics, but for accuracy. Dates, amounts, and receipts. I had written them all down. October 2018, $600. Paid Isolde's car insurance so it wouldn't get repossessed. January 2019, $1,250. Covered Mom's dental procedure when Dad said your insurance had lapsed. May 2020, $900. helped Isolde move into the artist loft in Portland. I turned the page. March 2021, $2,000. Submitted the grant application Isolde claimed to write, the one that paid for her mental health through sculpture project. Isolde flushed. You offered? No, I said calmly. I was manipulated. I met my mother's gaze. You didn't raise me. You extracted from me. And when I was no longer useful, you erased me, efficiently. Vera set her teacup down, slow and careful. We never intended to hurt you, Aelith, but families are complicated. Everyone gives in different ways. No, I interrupted. You don't get to intellectualize what you did. You made me the donor, the fixer, the silent partner in a family that only values breakdowns. It can be seen fixing. Thorn finally spoke. You're blowing this out of proportion. You were never asked to give anything. I turned to him, eyes steady. You're right. I was never asked. I was expected. Then I stood. This, I said, gesturing around the room, was your last chance to see me as a daughter. From here on out, I'm your legal opponent. I'm done negotiating for dignity. I turned, coat swishing at my sides, and walked out. No one followed. But just as I reached the door, Isolde's voice rang out. You'll regret this. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. By the time I placed my mug down beside the sink, the heat from the tea had already left my palms. The kitchen was still. Outside, traffic passed in quiet waves. Portland's hum never far. But inside my apartment, the stillness had changed. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from being alone. It was the kind you get when you've stopped chasing noise, when you've chosen to listen only to your own breath. Delora had just left, her bag slung over one shoulder, her voice low and certain. I'll file everything first thing tomorrow, she'd said. And Aelith, we found something else. She didn't elaborate then. She wanted me to see it myself. The next morning, she was back, this time with a file thicker than I expected and a tension in her expression I hadn't seen before. I'm sorry to bring this in person, she said, placing the folder gently on my kitchen table, but it's better that you know now than find out in court. I pulled it open, scanned the top page. My own name, Aelith Danvers, listed as a co-signer on 2 credit lines I'd never applied for. One linked to a business grant Isolde had received, another tied to a student loan consolidation from 4 years ago. My breath caught. I know, Delora said, gently interrupting. We had a forensic accountant go through their records after the grant article surfaced. Your social security number was used. Not once, multiple times. She let me flip through the pages. Account numbers, transaction dates, my digital signature pasted into a mortgage application from a property I'd never heard of. It gets worse, she said. They used your credit standing to secure tax benefits, backdated filings, and property title edits. My chest felt tight, not with shock. That was long gone, but with a simmering heat I'd never known I could carry for this long. They buried me, I whispered, not to Delora, but to the room. No, she said, her voice level. They tried to. You're the one standing. We filed 3 separate motions that afternoon: financial restitution, legal fraud, and property misrepresentation. She sent out notices to their attorney of record. Apparently, they'd retained someone after the family brunch fell apart. Vera attempted to delay the process, filing for continuance twice. Both were denied. And 2 weeks later, we were in court. Multnomah County Courthouse was colder than I remembered, though maybe that was just me. I sat in the plaintiff's chair, hands clasped together. I didn't dress for war. I wore navy slacks, a soft sweater, and the same boots I'd bought on clearance 2 winters ago. I didn't need to look strong. I just needed to sit in the truth. Vera arrived first. Her hair curled perfectly at the ends, that same beige coat she always wore when she wanted to appear unbothered. Thorn walked behind her, eyes downcast. Isolde came last, face pale, lips pressed together like she was bracing for impact. They didn't look at me. Not once. Delora stood when called and began her presentation with calm precision. Your Honor, this is not simply a matter of emotional damage. What we are showing today is a long-term, calculated misuse of identity and assets. involving forged documentation, unauthorized credit access, and the stripping of property rights from my client, Ms. Aelith Danvers. She clicked the remote in her hand. Slide after slide filled the courtroom screen, PDFs of my falsified signature, emails forwarding my personal documents to grant administrators, account access logs showing Vera logging in under my name. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead, at the judge, and then at the screen, like I was watching someone else's story unfold. A woman I pitied. A woman I finally believed deserved better. Vera tried to speak, twice. Her lawyer whispered something that made her sit down. Isolde shifted uncomfortably, her leg bouncing. Thorne remained still. When Delora finished, the courtroom fell quiet for a moment. Then the judge spoke. His voice was firm. The evidence is comprehensive and troubling. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Danvers. I breathed slowly, waiting. In accordance with Oregon law, the title to the Lake Oswego property will revert fully to Ms. Danvers. The defendants will have 30 days to vacate. A civil fine of $85,000 is imposed for damages, legal fees, and restitution. A restraining order will also be issued prohibiting any future use of Ms. Danvers' identity in legal, public, or financial records. Vera gasped softly. Isolde whispered something I didn't catch. Thorne finally lifted his gaze, but not to me. He stared at the judge, as if shocked the world would no longer bend to him. The gavel struck once. Court adjourned. I stood slowly, knees tight but steady. I didn't look back at the people I used to call my family. They weren't mine anymore. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned the soft gray of late afternoon. The news hit social media before we even reached the parking garage. An anonymous source, not me, but someone in that courtroom, leaked the full records. By the time I got home, a local news headline was already circulating online. Respected family found liable for fraud against their own daughter. I didn't correct it. I didn't repost it either. I simply made tea, sat by the window, and let the quiet come. Delora called that evening. It's not over for them, she said. They'll push back. Maybe not legally, but in other ways. You ready? I sipped from the mug, the chamomile warming my chest. Let them implode. They've built this mess on lies. I just stopped cleaning up after them. She laughed softly. You're not the woman who walked into my office 6 weeks ago. No, I agreed. I'm the one they thought would never fight back. And now? They'd have to learn what it meant to lose the person they always assumed would stay silent, even as the words left my mouth. Now we wait for them to implode. I didn't mean them with venom. I meant them like a prediction, a forecast, not a curse. Because when people like Vera and Thorne lose control, they don't burn quietly, they unravel, publicly, destructively, and messily. All I had to do was sit still. A week passed after the verdict, long enough for the story to circulate. I heard from a former colleague, a grant committee member, and an old friend from undergrad, all reaching out in ways that felt less like gossip and more like quiet recognition. Not one of them asked for details. They just said some version of, I always wondered if something was off. It rained the day the knock came, the kind of Portland rain that wasn't dramatic, just insistent, tapping against the windows like a steady reminder that time was passing. I had just pulled a sweater over my shoulders when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. No buzz. No text. Just that sound you can feel in your chest when it means something. I stood still for a moment, heart steady, legs firm. Then I walked to the door, checked the peephole, and there she was. Isolde. Hair soaked, makeup running, phone clutched in one hand like it was the last thing tethering her to the world. She wasn't dressed for drama, not her usual curated self, just a hoodie, leggings, and desperation. I didn't open the door, I just watched. She knocked again, a little louder this time. Aelith, she said, her voice cracking. Please, I need to talk. Still, I stood there, unmoved. I didn't know Dad used your name, she continued. I swear, I didn't know until last week. I wouldn't have. I didn't ask him to. Her voice broke. and for a moment, I closed my eyes. Not from pain, from the kind of mental exhaustion that sets in when you've heard this kind of plea before. Not exactly the same words, but the same pattern, excuse wrapped in apology, guilt smothered in blame. I just needed help, she went on. You've always had everything figured out. You don't spiral like I do. I mean, it's easier for you, right? I didn't laugh, but I did smile, not out of humor, but out of clarity. Inside, I could feel the ghost of myself who used to melt at that tone. The version of me that would have opened the door and said, "It's okay." I get it. The girl who believed keeping the peace was love. That version had been buried under paperwork, court records, and the quiet power of being believed. I turned away from the door. I made tea. The rain hadn't let up, and I didn't check again. I didn't need to. I knew she was still out there. An hour later, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name flash on the screen. Ewan. I paused. We hadn't spoken since he left, since he said he wasn't ready for someone so self-sufficient, since he called me resilient like it was a curse word. I answered. His voice was hesitant. I saw the article. Of course he had. I guess. He started, then tried again. I guess I always knew you deserved better, but I never knew you were bleeding that long. I didn't say anything right away. Then I replied calmly, "Yeah, I was." He was quiet for a beat. "I'm sorry." "I'm not," I said. We hung up without saying goodbye, and for once, that felt right. The rain thickened. The clock ticked past 8. I moved from the kitchen back to the couch, sat with my tea, and listened. Not to the world outside, but to the sound of someone sitting on the floor outside my door, the occasional sniffle, the tap of a phone against skin. Then her voice, small. "Please, don't make me go back there." I stared into my mug. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I didn't care. She could have come clean 100 times. She could have said something, anything, before I needed lawyers. But she didn't. And now that the mask had fallen and there was no audience left, she wanted grace. Grace I used to hand out like party favors. But tonight, I didn't open the door. I didn't even stand. Instead, I reached for my phone, opened a new message, and typed, "I needed you once. You hung up. Now you need me." I stayed quiet. That's the difference between us. I stared at the words. Then I hit delete. Not because they weren't true, but because they didn't need to be sent. Not everything had to end in punctuation. Some truths don't need delivery to be real. I leaned back against the couch cushion, the sound of rain softening around me, and let my chest rise and fall without effort. For the first time in my life, silence wasn't something to fear. It was something I'd earned. The sky outside my apartment was a dull shade of gray, the kind that made even early spring feel like a tired sigh. I had just put away the last of the clean dishes when I noticed the envelope on the floor. Slipped through the door mail slot, its edges slightly damp from the morning drizzle. There was no return address, no typed label, just my name, handwritten in delicate cursive that instantly sent me back 20 years. Meryl Quinn, my 5th-grade teacher. I sat down on the couch, legs crossed, careful with my knee, and opened the letter. "Aelith, you were quiet. Too quiet. And back then, I thought that meant you were okay. I was wrong. I see that now. I saw the news, not the details, just the headlines. It made me think of you, and I needed you to hear this. You mattered. Even then, I just didn't know how to show it. With regret and warmth, Meryl Quinn." The paper trembled slightly in my hand, not because I was overwhelmed, but because part of me had given up on ever hearing that kind of acknowledgement from anyone who knew me back then. Not a family member, not a teacher, not even a neighbor. I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope with more care than it probably deserved. Not because it undid anything, but because it was the first apology I hadn't had to ask for. Later that afternoon, I walked 3 blocks down to the edge of my old neighborhood. There was a new mural painted across the elementary school's brick wall now, filled with birds and stars and words like belonging and growth. I stood across the street from the school gate, hands in my pockets, and stared for a few long minutes. I didn't cross, didn't need to. The library was still where it always had been, the second room on the left from the entrance. I remembered sitting in the far corner during recess, pretending to be absorbed in books I'd already read twice, just to avoid the embarrassment of not being picked for a game or noticed on the field. Some kids got lost in stories because they loved adventure. I did it because the silence in fiction felt kinder than the silence of being ignored. By early evening, I was back in my apartment, slicing lemons in the kitchen as rice simmered on the stove. I was expecting a few people, not a party, just a quiet dinner. The kind of gathering you host not out of obligation, but because you genuinely want to break bread with people who have, in their own quiet ways, stood beside you when you didn't even know you were falling. Delora arrived first, punctual as always. She brought a bottle of wine and a pie from a bakery she swore by. Then came Nate from my office, the only one who visited me in the hospital and didn't once ask for an update on the project we'd been working on. Mrs. Carver from across the hall knocked gently. "I made my famous deviled eggs," she said with a wink. "Hope they still count as famous after all these years." And then, to my surprise, Meryl. She stood at the threshold for a second longer than necessary, her coat still damp, hair grayer than I remembered. "Is this okay?" she asked quietly. "It is," I said, and stepped aside to let her in. We ate around the small dining table I'd inherited from a Craigslist stranger. The plates didn't match. The napkins were paper, but the warmth? That was real. That was mine. No speeches, no toasts, just stories, a few laughs, and the soft comfort of unforced company. At one point, someone said, "You look lighter," and I smiled, not politely, not for show, but with the ease of someone no longer trying to earn her place at the table. "I finally stopped waiting to be seen," I said simply. That night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were stacked, I sat by the window with a mug of tea. Outside, the street was quiet, the usual mix of porch lights, distant barking, the occasional car rolling by. My phone buzzed once. It was from Vera. "Your father isn't doing well. He'd like to see you." No guilt-laced paragraphs, no manipulation, just a fact. I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond either. I placed the phone face down and turned my gaze back to the street, back to the life I was building one breath at a time. My legs still hurt when the weather turned, a reminder of the crash, of what was broken and pieced back together. But the ache in my chest? That was different now. It was duller, less urgent. The wound was there, yes, but it wasn't leaking anymore. It wasn't consuming me. Forgiveness isn't something you owe, and peace doesn't require permission. I took a deep breath, not for dramatic effect, but because I could. I wasn't healed. But I was whole, and that was enough. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is choosing yourself when no one else will. What would you have done if your family left you behind, again and again? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, raw, and unforgettable revenge stories that hit where it hurts.